Thank you all. I'm very excited to be here. I really do appreciate everyone coming out this morning, making a way through the snow. I know that it's probably nothing big for you. So I want to start off by talking a little bit about the last experience that I had at the dentist office. So I was there, I was in the chair, I was in that very vulnerable position that we all find ourselves in. And something interesting happened, something that, a sentence was said you don't normally want to hear at the dentist, where I'm laying there and there's 3 people crowded around, and one of them says to one of their colleagues, "Hey, you've got to come over here and see this." That's not what you want to hear. But in this case, I had actually caused it to happen, and it was something I was excited about. I'd been sitting in the waiting room on my phone watching the launch, the live cast of the one of the most recent SpaceX launches. And I was really excited about it because A, I'm kind of a rocket geek, and maybe a would-be in a different life rocket scientist. But B, I'm just plain obsessed with things that other humans get passionate about. I get incredibly happy by hearing and seeing other people happy. And so in that spirit, I want to play something for you. This was the video that I was watching at the dentist. And so I literally walked in and said, "Hey, before you start with your torture, can I take a minute to finish this? Because this is the moment I wanted to see." In addition to watching, I really want you to listen. What I think you hear, or at least what I hear, is passion, commitment, purpose. Every person that you hear cheering, no matter what their role is in this organization, has invested their time, energy, and commitment, their intellect to the goal at hand. They see it as important, perhaps just to them, perhaps for the transformation of mankind. And I think that if it's our goal as educators, right, to help students find their science identities, their sense of self-efficacy, their sense of purpose, a sense of resilience, this is what it looks and sounds like. I'm sorry, I'll move on. That video goes on for a few minutes. But I really think this is what it looks like. And the reason I think this is what it looks like, because this is hard. This is hard in a lot of ways, not just ways that are scientific, ways that require input and intellect from everything we do at universities. In fact, maybe I can be hopeful that this talk finally resolves the tension we always feel in higher ed between scholarship, broad scholarly capacity, and vocational training, the tension between deep discipline knowledge and broad professional capacities. I say that because initiatives like this, what I call good work, and again, independent of whether you're into rockets or not, good work requires science, engineering, math, language, communication, collaboration, logic, emotional intelligence, empathy, patience, reason, everything that we strive to do at a university, everything we strive to provide the students that we serve. And if we're called then to provide students with experiences that resemble this, or that prepare them for this, then we should be doing so on day 0 that they arrive. And that's the basis by which I really lead initiatives in discovery-based learning, and that's why I'm very passionate about first-year initiatives. What you're going to hear from me today focuses heavily on my experiences in discovery-based learning and the impacts they can have on young university students. And I want to be super clear that I come from the perspective of doing work like this, preparing young professionals to be passionate, committed, excited, resilient in the face of challenges of this level, and not just socially engaged at their institution. What I want to describe to you is the work I've done, sort of as we might message it to students, as it's led by faculty that I work with at the university, and then sustained by higher education administrator dweebs like me. Along the way, I'm going to be looking for decisions that I've made that allowed this to be scalable, efficient, and effective. And I'll try to call those out as we go. So as was mentioned, I lead an initiative, a program at the University of Maryland called FIRE, the First Year Innovation Research Experience. And again, I'd like to start by describing it as I might describe it to students. So very commonly, I give talks to students, to parents, welcoming them to this program. And I'm always surprised when I started in this line of work, I really imagined, oh, this is going to be an easy sell, like awesomeness on a plate, come be a part. And turns out it's much harder than I thought. Students and parents are incredibly resistant and almost suspicious of anything that's above and beyond the normal degree plan. And I don't blame them. You know, there's a lot they don't, you know, that they're very hesitant about with respect to their sons and daughters going to a university and getting a degree and progressing professionally. And more being asked of them is often a lot to handle, especially as a student starts. So how do we then message to students and parents when they're joining us? Well, the first thing we do is welcome them. We say, we're going to really shake up your first year. The goal of this is not to be gentle and easy. It's to really provide what we call a radically atypical first year experience in which the wall is broken down between the educational mission of the institution and the research mission. And in this spirit, my institution, the University of Maryland, is very similar to your institution in terms of having a really well-developed mission on both sides of that wall. And in fact, what we do is not education and then some amount of research, and we're doing research over here and we're doing education over there and trying to build connections between the two, but we are doing education through research. We're getting students deeply immersed in authentic research teams and educating through that process. Okay, so students then say, okay, that's great, but what is FIRE? And I say, okay, well, picture if you were able to combine your interests. Stuff that you might be studying, something that relates to your major, but maybe something that you're just really interested in that actually isn't your intended major at all, that is actually a part of the University of Maryland research mission. That you say, I know this is a field that's studied, I'd like to be part of it, but can I do so in a way where I'm also making progress on my degree? And that's the first way in which we describe FIRE. So it's a nice Venn overlap of those three goals, to combine a student's interests with established scholarship under the umbrella of the research mission of the institution in a way that allows students to progress in their degrees. And you say, okay, well, how does FIRE support the completion of my degree? And this is where we start to get more specific. Okay, you're going to be in a program that's going to be a flow through courses. And I hate it when we have to talk about courses because it seems like we get very nuts and bolts at that point, but students actually get very reassured when they get a sense of the structure of how things will work. Students will be a part of a first semester course that'll lead to a research group. The program, even though it's called the first year innovation and research experience, is somewhat the first year and a half innovation and research experience, and this is what it'll look like. I'll provide more details on this in a moment. Students ask what they'll be able to research, to which we answer almost anything. So this program was founded out of the Office of the Provost with the goal in mind of representation across the university. We didn't want this to be just a College of Natural Sciences thing. We didn't want it to be just an engineering thing, even just a STEM thing. Half of our research groups, as you'll see in a moment, come from the social sciences and the arts and humanities. And we've worked really hard to learn how scalable undergraduate research works in those disciplines. You can see here, these are the current 17 research groups that we have in operation. And I've tried to organize them, again, by social sciences, natural sciences, and technology. The technology ones are very multidisciplinary. So for instance, I would call out Phillips Virtual Culture is very much a computer science stream, and that it's deeply working in augmented and virtual reality. But we also have faculty advisors, and part of the research mission of that group is heavily focused on art history and the integration of technology in art installations. So it has a heavy arts and humanities focus as well. So again, we have 17 of these in operation. So how do we take these and meld it with this student experience? Well, all of our FIRE students, all 750 of this year, we're looking to grow to above 800 this coming year, start in our first semester course. And I've done talks where I spend the entire 45 minutes just talking about this course. How do you bring 750 or 800 students together and prepare them to join an authentic research group across, again, the disciplines represented by the institution? We've chosen to focus heavily on students' ability to work with scholarly literature, and we use data science. We have a paper coming out this spring that will talk about our use of data science as the gateway experience for students learning the principles of research. We also focus heavily on students' capacities to communicate and collaborate, again, on authentic, real projects. This prepares them to join one of our currently 17 research streams, where they spend a year. In the first semester that they join their, what we call a stream, we do square zero training. Many of our students will join a stream where they actually have some previous experience. That's great, we utilize that. One of the things we embrace in FIRE is asynchronous learning and progression of students from students to leadership roles. Because this is how labs work, right? Students that have previous capacity or show leadership or just move ahead quickly, they become leaders in labs, right? Labs don't work by keeping everyone in a lockstep 14, 15-week curriculum. They work by embracing the asynchronicity of training, competency building, commitment, and then potential leadership. We do that in FIRE. So students join there. They have the capacity to participate in an optional summer fellows program that allows them to get more deeply immersed and build more leadership capacity. And then they complete their experience in the fall of their second year by moving from trainee to independent practitioner within their research group. The goal in this semester is really to drive results to meaningful completion. Finally, we have several ways in the program in which we help students make a next step. It is very much on purpose that students are in FIRE starting on day zero at the university. I'm a huge believer that if you're going to have this type of personal and professional impact on an undergraduate, you have to start it on day zero. But you also then have to ensure they take that experience and take a next step with it. They need to move to a faculty lab. They need to move to an internship. They need to get entrepreneurial with it, if that's their thing. And they often need help with making that step, and so we have several program resources set up that helps them do that. Students ask, parents ask, what am I going to get out of this? I see the course and all that, but tell me what this is really going to boil down to. And we say, well, if you get nothing else, you're absolutely positively going to get a t-shirt. I can guarantee that. That's usually the moment at which we hand out the t-shirts. But very importantly, we are able to guarantee through the structure of what we do that they will develop a deep relationship with a faculty member on campus. We are able to guarantee that they will have meaningful professional experiences. This is actually a picture. I do not believe in stock photography. You'll never find stock photography in my talks. This is actually a picture of two of our students from our Risk Communication and Resilience group giving a briefing at a Department of Homeland Security conference. They were invited. They were originally, based on published work they had done, they were invited because DHS thought they were grad students. And they were trying to increase the presence of grad students in some of these academic activities they were doing. These are freshmen. They showed up and evidently they did an excellent job. Our students will get the ability to move from, again, early practitioner trainee to accomplished practitioner and member of the discipline to potential leader. We think that's very important and, again, very representative of how the professional world works. And then finally, a real community. You all know firsthand here how challenging a large university can be to undergraduates. And it's great for us to create experiences, especially experiences that resemble the professional world, not artificial sort of drum, circle, and pizza-driven experiences, but real functional work groups that allow students to simultaneously develop real community. And then in addition, motivation and resilience. Research is hard, right? It fails. It's designed to fail. But courses often don't work that way. Contrastingly, courses are typically designed to work, especially lab courses. They're typically designed to demonstrate principles, and if this lab goes right, the outcome will be this, and you will have developed a greater sense of that, right? And I'm guilty of this. I can think of the labs I've taught on photosynthesis, for instance, where I walked out of it going, I feel a little bit ashamed about what just happened there in terms of I don't think my students more deeply understand the principle of photosynthesis, and all I did was use some artificial system to demonstrate that it works. There was no capacity for students to dive in, learn more, dig deeper, and more importantly, there was no capacity for it to go wrong and for them to have learned from that experience. From there forward, I vowed that the programs I build and support would be really targeted at those that have the capacity to build motivation and resilience through intrinsic failure. Okay, so I shift a gear from how we might describe this to students to more of an academic perspective of how this is actually led by faculty on our campus. So to give you a sense of scale, this is what last year's FIRE class looked like. So the students that started with us this last year, we're currently in the middle of getting pictures of students who have just matriculated into our research groups for this year. And I think it's important. Since we started this initiative 4 years ago, I have been unable to get all students together for one glorious picture. So this is the closest I can come to showing sort of the scope and scale of the program. Again, we're currently operating 17 research groups from disciplines across the institution. Now, the question you might be asking is, okay, let's dive in a bit. What does one of these research groups actually look like? Here's two of them. On the left, we have sustainability analytics. So it's an applied economics group that does a lot of big data science and modeling that impacts prediction of energy and adoption of efficient technologies. And on the right here is our antibiotic resistance group, a group studying antibiotic resistance in specific sexually transmitted diseases. These groups are operated through the collaboration of two very important faculty members, one that I'll refer to as our faculty advisor or advisors, and a research educator. Now, I'm going to talk a lot about research educators today, so I'm not going to try to get it out all right now. But think of two collaborative faculty members that lead each of these groups. Students who were members of the group 1 year have the capacity to move through a complete year and then actually double back as peer mentors for a second year. So every one of our groups has typically somewhere between 4 and 8 peer mentors. And then these groups are designed to serve between 30 and 40 students. Typically about 35 is what we have found to be a nice functional number. Now the research educators. I mentioned I'd talk quite a bit about them. I will. You're going to hear me say several times that I think of them as the lifeblood of this program and the complete and total way in which it actually works. These are the 16 that we currently have on staff. We're in a bit of transition right now, but you can see, again, I want to emphasize that every one of our research groups has a dedicated research educator. These individuals are professional track faculty. They're appointed as assistant clinical professors. They are experts in their research discipline, and they are completely and totally responsible for the research group that they lead. And when I say completely and totally responsible, I want you to think in like every way possible. The conception and execution of the research mission, publication, scholarly work, the management of students, the curriculum of the affiliated courses, the assessment of student training, assessment of what students are doing within the course structure, facilities, budget. They manage the undergraduate peer mentors. They run the ship on a day in, day out basis. I'll be talking quite a bit about how do you find people like this, how do you train them, and how do you evaluate them to assure efficacy. Now, I wanted to show a bit more about our research streams. This whole talk will come to a logjam if I try to go through this slowly, so I'm going to go quickly. What I want you to see again, though, is that every one of our research groups has a faculty advisor and has a research educator. What you might also pay attention to are the disciplines engaged. So we have an addiction science group. This is one of our digital humanities groups. Our animal and human relationships, autonomous unmanned systems is engineering. This is a group that we started collaboratively with Capital One. This is a group from electrical and computer engineering, a design group that is very interesting. It's a combination of principles from mechanical engineering with how humans interact through the process of design. An aptamers group, a molecular microbiology group, molecular microbiology, This was the group I mentioned that's working both in the arts and humanities and heavily in computer science with augmented and virtual reality. This is a group that looks at messaging that municipalities and other authorities do during moments of crisis and works in the field of communications to establish better methods by which communication is mediated through crisis, during crisis. I mentioned sustainability economics or sustainability analytics as an applied economics group. And then finally, Transgenerational Brain Initiative is a molecular biology group using the C. elegans worm system. Now again, what I wanted you to see there was our number of research educators and faculty advisors. This model of using a research educator as the day in, day out leader has been well proven. This was initially established at the University of Texas Freshman Research Initiative program, and it's been shown to work really well in the natural sciences and engineering. One of the ways in which we've developed it further, again, is in the number of groups that we have in the social sciences and the work that we're doing to take this model to the arts and humanities. Now, before I move on from this as led by faculty section, I do want to then comment on the role of our tenured and tenure track faculty advisors. One of the things that we learned over the years, and I was a part of the team that helped grow the program, the Freshman Research Initiative at Texas, is that in order to have tenured and tenure track leadership as a part of a large-scale sustainable undergraduate research program, is their role had to directly come from their expertise, but also be very cognizant of their limitations. When you ask tenure and tenure track faculty to be deeply immersed and to try to lead a number of students like this in undergraduate research day in, day out, week in, week out, it is just begging for burnout. It's begging for them to do it maybe 1 year because they're passionate about it, because they want to help, because they'd like to see something move forward, but it is not sustainable. That's why we developed this model where it's a partnership between an established tenure track faculty advisor, someone who has an established line of research and a presence at the university, with this additional person that we bring to actually run the ship and run the affiliated courses on a day-to-day basis. Now, the benefits to this tenure track faculty advisor are enumerated here. They're collaborators. It's kind of like they get like an auto postdoc that is working in their research domain while leading undergraduates doing the same. The biggest advantage we've seen, both at the University of Maryland and at Texas, is this pipeline of vetted, trained undergrads. The moment one of our faculty advisors starts a fire stream, this essentially becomes the pipeline through which they train and select undergraduates to matriculate to their labs. And the real benefit is they get them in their labs in their sophomore year, right? They're trained, they're vetted by the research educator, they're often on the verge of a publication. Like, how many tenure track faculty would love to get a sophomore that's already on the verge of a pub in their discipline? That person is probably really going to be able to follow through on substantive, meaningful outcomes in their sophomore, junior, and senior year, something that our faculty advisors don't often experience when undergraduates just cold call, knock on their doors. All right, so the final perspective that I'd really like to talk about is my perspective. I've presented FIRE from the perspective of how we message it to students and parents, how we have this two classes of faculty leaders that contribute to how it's run. But then what is it I do in terms of designing, running, sustaining this thing that makes it, again, the promise of this talk was scalable, efficient, and effective? Well, I should probably put this at the beginning, but we'll just go ahead and do it now. I should give you a sense of where I'm coming from. I've had a couple different careers. I began as a software engineer. My undergraduate degree is in computer science. And I worked at several companies that did large-scale network discovery and analysis. I was actually talking to Ryan when we were walking over here about my last visit to MIT was over 20 years ago, in which I was part of a company trying to sell you all something. And so it is very interesting to be here in a very different career as a higher education administrator and leader, thinking about totally different things. I earned my Ph.D. in cell and molecular biology, focused heavily on functional and comparative genomics. And as was mentioned, I started FIRE 4 years ago at the University of Maryland and have grown it from an initial cohort of about 150 students to currently, this year we have 700. We're targeting hopefully over 800 students in the coming year for this program. I'm also very interested, as a computer scientist and data geek, I'm way into the use of institutional data to better understand students. We're sitting on top, right, of all this knowledge of our students, the choices they make, how they do in our courses, what they're doing outside of our courses, and what we can do to better support their success. And so I work on a number of initiatives at the University of Maryland focused on those goals. The first thing I'll say in my super opinionated way is know your mission and targeted outcomes. We are fortunate to live in an age, right, where a number of best practices, and we often use this term, high impact practices, are well documented, and you can find scholarly papers on them, you can find Chronicle of Higher Ed articles on them, and it can be very tempting, right, to take them off the shelf and we're gonna do this because it looks cool. Or I have a friend in another institution that's doing it. That's a great place to start. But what I would ask you to do is take it a step further to really define the institutional and student outcomes that you're after, and then use methods that are known to affect those goals. So I'll demonstrate that by first sort of putting up FIRE's mission statement. I didn't develop this mission statement lightly. I developed it, as all mission statements should be developed, to clearly communicate what we're doing and the impacts we wish for it to have. So we are in the business of not providing students exposure to research or research demonstration or the hope that they might do X with us so that they move on to research. We're giving them authentic research experience in a way that allows them to be more academically successful, simultaneously develop personally and professionally, and have their professional opportunities grow as an outcome. My next assertion is that intervention is science and use methods that work. So again, I would like to assert that I use research as the playground on which we operate because it works. So we now have a large body of scholarship that clearly show us that you can do research individually with faculty and groups, that the properties of authentic research show that you're using authentic practices, you're collaborating, you're doing work that's broadly relevant, you have the capacity to make discoveries. But most importantly, this is the thing I wake up working on every day, is this temporal thing here. That if students are in research experiences, especially serial research experiences, where they're starting here and then maybe they move to a structured second course and a third course, there's a reason FIRE is a 3-course sequence, that they move from early outcomes to meaningful late outcomes, again, in a well-studied and structured way. And this is what we're after. We want students in the beginning building their technical and analytical skills. We want them interacting with faculty and their peers. That's all great. But what we're really after, right, is self-efficacy, motivation, ownership, buy-in, commitment. And those things take time. There's a reason why, 1 week exposure to research, work groups and camps, they're effective and they get students excited, but they don't produce the outcomes that a longer term experience does, is because those outcomes take time. Now again, to give you a sense of where we've come from, I was a part of the team. I was fortunate. I joined the Freshman Research Initiative in 2007 and helped grow it to near its current size of 29 research streams impacting over 1,200 students a year. They are a monstrous and amazing organization at the University of Texas. We are growing in our size and impact at the University of Maryland. And we've adopted many of the principles that we learned through the development of this at the University of Texas, but we've had to also develop a lot of new principles given that we are university-wide and the Freshman Research Initiative at Austin is specifically focused on the College of Natural Sciences. Now, I've said several times that this works, so I'll point out a couple scholarly outcomes. This is a paper that came out in 2016 that is a publication that details some of the impacts of this program at Texas. So we see significant increases in graduation rates, and especially graduating students that graduate with a STEM degree. Now, we're very early in this process at the University of Maryland because we just started. Our first students joined their first research streams actually in January of 15, and then we only had the capacity due to sort of adequate sample sizes and properties that our population needed to have for us to do propensity score matching. So basically, when you're doing assessment of something like this, what you'd like to do is say, we serve these students, and I can find exactly matching comparison students that aren't going through this experience. But along every variable you might imagine, they match exactly. And that's what we're able to do. And we're also able to do that a bit because FIRE at the University of Maryland is not an honors program. We are inviting students in a semi-randomized fashion, and thus that removes a lot of the selection bias in our invitation process and helps us have confidence in our propensity score matching. Now, that said, when I look at this 2015-16 cohort, one of the challenges we have at the University of Maryland, probably similar to what you have here at MIT, is relatively high persistence rates in the background population. So if you see here this comparison group, in the first year they go, so we retain almost 95% of students moves into the 80s. So Texas had much lower persistence rates, so the success of the program was much more clear. We are, I think, showing significant impact on persistence, but again, that's with a relative background of decently high persistence already. The next thing that I'll say is that you need to make it easy for all students to say yes. And the number one thing I'll emphasize there is the curricular integration. I believe in the program we have and what we offer to students, and it would be a compelling sell if this was an outside and above beyond thing. I could stand in front of students and parents and make that sell. But man, is it easier when I'm able to say that every single one of these courses helps them fulfill general education requirements. You're going to be taking courses anyhow that fulfill these requirements. Why not do it in a structured way with me that moves you forward personally and professionally? I've said that sentence so many times, and it works. Collaborate. So one of the things we try to be cognizant of is not doing it all on our own. I mentioned earlier that we use peer mentors. We need a lot of them. So to serve 700 or 800 students, I need at least 100, maybe more peer mentors per year deployed across our research groups. And one of the very super cool things that we were able to make happen was not building a peer mentoring program on our own, but collaborating with our Center for Teaching Excellence to do so. So I was close partners with Dr. Ben Peterson, who at that time was our Associate Provost of Teaching and Learning. He had just started what we call our Teaching and Learning Transformation Center. And I sat down with him and said, look, I'm about to do this. I'm going to start a large peer mentoring program. It's going to be serious. It's going to be awesome. But stop me. Let me not do it. Let me work with you, and let's build one for the campus as a whole so that we can increase the profile and awareness of peer mentoring as an effective practice. We can therefore increase the institutional use. We can decrease the lift for departments that are having a hard time getting initiatives like this off the ground. And for me, yay, I was able to subcontract essentially something that would be really hard for me to maintain year in, year out to specialists who are really good at running this sort of thing. And this is where the University of Maryland's AMP program came from. And it's had great impacts. So I am AMP's biggest customer in terms of peer mentorship training and deployment, but exactly what we were after happened in terms of a number of other constituencies coming forward and saying, hey, we'd like to do this too. And so AMP is serving as a central center of expertise on peer mentoring at our campus. Now, the final section that I'm going to talk about is what I think of as the absolute total key to sustained impact, and that has to do with these research educators. They're amazing. They wake up every single day committed to the students they lead. And again, they wear a lot of hats. They're research leaders, they're educators, they're mentors, they're professional advisors. They develop close relationships with the students and work with them in our research settings and labs every single day. So how do you find the right people? How do you train them? And how do you evaluate them to ensure that you're achieving the impacts you're after? Well, the bad news for me is that success is defined by turnover. So we're able to find these folks, we're able to train them, measure them, make them effective, they grow professionally, and the good news is they move on to exciting next positions. This is a great incubator, especially for tenure track positions at slightly smaller institutions that deeply value undergraduate research mentorship and teaching. So that's great. I love the fact that just as we're impacting undergraduates, we're impacting the training pathway for future faculty. But the bad news is I constantly have to find these folks. Now, finding them is not hard. It's often finding the right individuals that's a challenge. One of the pointers that I put up there is that it is indeed very hard to find people in computer science. Turns out the market, I think, is very good right now, if you happen to have a Ph.D. in computer science. And what we've learned is that you can find folks with this training. If you want to do machine learning, analytics, visualization with undergraduates, there's a lot of people that come from backgrounds in applied economics, physics, bioinformatics, atmospheric sciences, GIS, et cetera, that have these capacities that can lead these research groups, and you don't necessarily have to be in the desperate search for computer scientists. But in a more general sense, how do we find these individuals? Well, we find them by searching, of course. We post positions on Chronicle like everyone does. We do interviews. And we have learned to, A, be continually searching. I have a post out there at all times looking for these types of individuals. We have learned to build research groups around them. So this is a big deal. When we first started, we built our research groups around our faculty advisors. And that was a great way to start. I did an RFP on campus. Awesome faculty came to me. They said, I've got an idea. I think it can scale. Let's do this. That is how we got the ship off the ground. But we have learned to transition such that we search for research educators that have capacities for leadership, education, mentorship, strong professionalism with students. And then we actually build the research groups around them. And we do that in a way that we're not overly constraining our search focused on specific disciplines, but more importantly, we're looking for the right humans to affect these roles. I've learned that career arc matters. You've really got to have a strong sense that this position makes sense for this putative research educator at this time, that this makes sense in the pathway they're communicating to you they'd like to be on. And they need to have a growth mindset. They need to be the type of person that shows up every day curiously wanting to learn more, wanting to pick up new methods, wanting to perhaps expand their career into an entirely new research discipline, because that's an awesome way to lead students doing the same thing. We've also learned that peer mentorship is very effective for these individuals, that you can pair them up. And so, for instance, I could take Dr. Mark Wong, who recently moved on to a tenure track position at another institution. He became an amazing leader for training our new research educators that would come on board. In addition to searching for and finding the right humans for this role, you've got to have the ability to look them in the eye and say, I can describe this job to you. And I can do it in such a way that I'm not gonna give an aspirational speech or wave my hands in a way that Killion tends to do and hope that you take something away, but I can actually hand you a document where we have defined excellence in this role. We have learned to define excellence under what we call 4 pillars. Our research leadership, everything that has to do with leading and running the research operation, educational excellence, everything that has to do with running great courses and embracing progressive curricula and pedagogies that make courses in research happen, strong mentorship of students, and then finally, strong capacities as a professional, the ability to be accountable, to communicate, be a part of a team, to develop the broader FIRE community and our sense of mission on campus we've seen is important to someone becoming a part of our program. So we can clearly define this for them, And given that we look for the right people, we can define and train them in the job, we have found that it is incredibly important to engage in meaningful evaluation on an annual basis. And so I will say to you that fire research educators are evaluated each year, and we use a number of information sources to drive this process. First, I told you that we define excellence, and we have a very large document that helps lay out what we mean, again, by research excellence, educational mentorship, and professionalism. So we define it. We give research educators the capacity annually to do self-assessment using the Qualtrics instrument that we've designed. We combine comparative and ongoing analytics with this process, so I'll be giving you a lot more detail on that in a moment. And then we have a qualitative discussion about everything we see and about setting goals for the coming year for them to both celebrate their success and continue to grow as professionals. So what do I mean? Whoops, sorry about that. This section number 3 here, comparative analytics. What do I mean by that? Well, I mean that we take course evaluations, we take survey questions derived from the class of general education courses we're using called Scholarship and Practice. We take questions that are aligned with our vision, mission, and values. And then we're actually using 2 instruments that were developed under the umbrella of this undergraduate research impact on students. That I didn't develop these, practitioners in my field developed these, and I'll talk about these more in a moment. Annoying assertion number 400 from me, learn R, or some similar scripting language. It is amazing how much easier my job is when it comes to things like this. Like, I've got 17 of these people. I've got to combine all this data and paint a picture annually. It is amazingly easier if I can use some sort of automatable process to make that happen. So a bit of a non sequitur, but if you've never learned like Python or some scripting language, I teach courses on that at the University of Maryland. I specifically teach them to non-majors, so computer scientists aren't allowed in this one course that I teach. And I see undergraduates pick it up quickly and learn it on a daily basis. We can all do so, and I promise it'll make your job easier. So where do we survey students? Well, we get them at the very beginning, at the end of this first semester, at the end of the second semester, and at the end of this third semester. And again, we're asking questions that across a number of different domains, and I'll show these to you. So first, course eval questions. These are the same questions that our general institution course evaluations use. And you may say, these things have nothing to do with research, right? So my instructor was well prepared for class, was versed in the material, handled questions, treated students with respect. No, they don't have anything to do with doing research with students, but we still find we get incredibly good signal from them. So for instance, I can take one stream, so this is one of our research educators in one semester, and compare someone who is absolutely experienced and driving the course part of their responsibility very strongly, and I can measure that through the student response to these questions, and compare it to someone who might be struggling a little bit. Now, more important than those one-to-one comparisons is the ability to look at everyone leading a research group and getting a sense of what normal looks like. So for instance, my instructor treated students with respect. Every fire research educator gets an anonymous code word. We coach them heavily to never divulge their anonymous code word so that we can do these analytics and share them with the team. These things never come up outside of the context of one-on-one discussions. So I would never put this up in a staff meeting, right, and have us all wrestling with it there. I think that'd be incredibly insensitive. But we do talk about them in one-on-one discussions and especially in annual evaluations. And what I'll show you for instance here is that top line represented someone who was not achieving at what we would consider to be a normal level. And what we found was that that individual was not being disrespectful to students, that it was really a cultural issue, that they were approaching the mentorship of their students in a way they had been trained to, and they thought was appropriate in terms of leadership and communication, that we thought might not be appropriate for first semester freshmen at a university. And if it had not been for an instrument like this, it's hard to know that, especially when you're running a large operation that's spread across campus. We have questions that relate to, again, our class of general education courses. These questions really drive towards, are we engaged in real research with students? Are they engaging scholarship? Are they applying relevant methods? Are they critiquing and refining a project? Are they collaborating? And again, what I want to show you here is that this is actually not comparing one research educator to another. This is pretty cool. This is year 2. This is year 1. This is awesome. I love this. I love these moments when I'm doing annual evaluation talks and I can sit down with someone and say, look how you've grown this year. And again, it's my job. I have to be very sensitive such that I'm not communicating that all you are to me professionally is the data. I have to know much more about what's going on and what they're doing, what's happening in their research and education world. But to have real data where you can say, hey, we looked at this last year and we talked about ways in which you could potentially grow and your students could come out of this feeling like they had a deeper, more meaningful research experience. And look, you did it. That's pretty cool. Again, another example is this gives us the ability to measure anomalies. So across our research groups, we see the ability for students to communicate. We see one of our groups, students were feeling they didn't have the capacity to collaborate. I was able to get signal on that in their first semester experience and intervene in a meaningful way. We've developed questions that align with our program values. Now, most of these values are hijacked directly from the literature on undergraduate research. And again, I think I'm running close to overtime, so I'm going to move forward quickly. What we can do is clearly show impacts as related to this. So for instance, we look across students that come from a variety of different colleges, and they're reporting to us that their FIRE experience is helping them select a major. This helps us know if one of the parts of our mission we're fulfilling. Now again, I mentioned that we utilize not just questions we've developed, but we're utilizing questions that come from the literature. So this survey was developed to measure student perceived gains in things like discussing research with others, their identity as a scientist, their confidence. We also use the URSA survey, which looks at a number of different variables. One thing I would call out here is personal gains. So their confidence in their ability to contribute, to work independently, to understand what they're doing. And again, what I'm showing you here are aggregate results for all of our students across our cohorts. But it's very important for me to dive in specifically to research groups, specific research groups at specific times, and get a sense of what's working where and what might not be working, and intervene where appropriate. So my conclusions from there is that combining data is very meaningful. It allows for this rapid intervention. One of the things we're proud of with FIRE is that if something's not working, we fix it, right? And not all first-year experiences work that way. Sometimes first-year experiences start off on a good note and then they evolve weirdly over time because no one's job is to watch it. I'm proud because I wake up, it's kind of uncool, but it's kind of cool that my job is to watch it. And I am the shepherd of efficacy. But I will caution, you have to be very careful when you do that. Do not react to everything you see in the data. Staff need to be a part of developing this process. They need time to develop. Hiccups need to be able to naturally happen, right? This is good management, right? Anytime there's a hiccup with somebody, you don't call them into your office and say, I'm so concerned. The same thing is true here. It takes very careful use of this data. And they need to be assured that they're more to you than just the data. This is some signal, it tells us this, but tell me more, and let's work together on this. All right, well, thank you guys so much.
Okay. And we'll now open up to Q&A. There's also a microphone over there.
Well, thanks. That's really interesting. I wanted to ask a little bit about the research educators.
Yeah.
They're at the core of what you do. you're building your research groups around them. It turns out that over time they develop and they get better and better.
Yeah.
Why don't you want that, at least some of them, to be a long-time position?
Oh, it's a great question. I apologize if I imply that I don't want that. So I can think of 4 individuals off the top of my head right now that are in their 5th, headed toward their 6th year. So if they develop and are doing well, the research group appears to be healthy. One of the dangers, right, is when we operate these research groups for many years, they can go from being authentic research engagements to turns of the crank because they become so well developed. But as long as everything is still healthy, we do not shut anything down that's working. The bigger thing that typically happens is that folks move on from these positions to a professional next step.
So can you develop incentives for them to stay?
Great
If you have
question.
people who are really great, what can you do to keep them?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. Yes is the answer. So fortunately, at the University of Maryland, we've made a lot of efforts to look at promotion of professional track faculty. And so that's number one thing I can do, is I can promote within the professional track line in the same way faculty are promoted in TT lines. So number one, is we can promote by title, and that compensation goes hand in hand with that. The bigger challenge is probably one of compensation, that I can't move up into the compensation levels that someone may desire to move to at that stage of their career. And that's something, I mean, I'll say openly, I've got to look at long term. This program, in terms of size, sustainability, what my budget looks like annually, it was designed in a certain way that reflects that the research educators are typically coming relatively fresh from their PhDs, and compensation levels need to be at X. You point out really accurately that there's benefits to being had by keeping really senior people on board that may require higher levels of compensation, and that maybe my program budget needs to be modulated with that in mind. And that's something we're now like approaching. We're hitting our 4th, 5th year, and I'm having to think more about that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I think we have time for one more question.
Go for it.
Somewhat similar question. I'm curious what the setup for a new fire stream looks like. Like, is that something that is always happening on an ongoing basis as you find new research educators? What is the timeline for actually getting that stream established?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, what does it take to start a new fire stream? We have moved from, so I mentioned in the very beginning, we used to do an annual RFP targeting TT faculty. So we started with faculty advisors, big call, got proposals from them, and had a really clear timeline in which we evaluated proposals, greenlit something new, and then got it ready for launch in January. Because that's when our new streams launch. That's when that second semester students join a stream happens. What we've learned is that that model doesn't work well in the face of uncertainty. So in the beginning, that was great because we knew how many we were launching in our first year, how many we had to have ready. It was great. And then every single year, that model broke more and more. We recognized this last year that the model was fully, totally, completely broken, and we just let it go. And what we've done is we've moved to, I talked earlier to this approach where we have an ongoing post for research educators. So we are in the search for really great candidates for research educators. We keep a constant eye on that. We're constantly talking to people, keeping them aware of our timeline. And then as we get closer sort of to the summer, fall, and we get a better sense of individuals that might be moving on, and people we either need to replace or new research groups we're looking to start, we start the process of recruiting and hiring those research educators first, and then we actually go out and see if we can pair and find a faculty advisor for them. So we've completely reversed the process. The next thing that I would address is where do we find the labs, the facilities, things like that. It is absolutely completely partnership with our departments. We believe very heavily that fire groups need to be near their authentic department home, but it also means that I have to, once I have a research educator and a faculty advisor and we say, hey, we want to start this in January 2020, I'm then going like hat in hand to a department chair saying, please help me out. Do you have anything that you're not using? And usually if I like smile or do something just right, they're willing to help me out, and I get a lab, and we're pretty much ready to go at that point.
There's a class in here.
Oh.
12:05. So we want to get ready, but thank you so
Thank you all so much.